Hello, horror fans, and welcome back to the Script to Screen podcast. And today we are absolutely thrilled to welcome Chris Devlin to the show. Chris is the writer of the Wretched Emily Derringer, 2022's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the film we most recently covered on Script to Screen, Cobweb. And I think it's no exaggeration to say, Chris, both Lee and I were left utterly inspired by the Cobweb script. So we can't thank you enough for agreeing to chat to us. We're just completely overjoyed, utterly sort of overwhelmed to have you on the show.
Well, that's very flattering to hear. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was meant to be enjoyed. I got my start as an assistant, and um, as an assistant, you're just constantly reading so many screenplays and writing coverage for them, so your bosses can be the ones to pretend that they read them. And so, um, I obviously always appreciated a script that was just a good read that had some literary merit. So that was the goal. And so I love hearing that.
Well, it's amazing to have you here. I mean, it certainly was a great read. Both of us kind of really enjoyed it. Um, Before we dive into kind of screenwriting and, obviously the Cobweb script, we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what kind of inspired you to set out on your path as a writer. Where did it all start for you?
Um, I mean, kind of a hard question to answer just because I feel like I've always wanted to work in movies or storytelling in some capacity for literally as long as I remember. I can't think of a time before it. And obviously that took different uh turns over the years as I understood how the world worked. When I was a kid, I wanted to write children's books, and then I wanted to be an actor because I kind of just thought that actors were making it all up as they went along, and they were the
Sure.
ones who were kind of generating the story. But I wasn't a very good actor, and a lot of auditions to be in school plays and whatnot made that clear. But fortunately, I realized that that's not actually how movies work, and I was very blessed to have a mom who really encouraged that pursuit in a very practical sense. I was actually I mentioned this right before we started. I was just visiting my mom in Pennsylvania, and I was looking at my bookshelf, and there's a lot of like books there that are like, here are the other careers that you can have in entertainment.
Right.
There's a best boy, there's a gaffer. Because I was really dead set on being a director. And again, that was a thing where I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I went to film school at Temple University. And although I still would like to direct someday,
Mm.
there I was really confronted with the fact that I don't have any movies or projects that I'm leaving here with that I'm particularly proud of, but I have a lot of scripts that I think I can really hang my hat on. And so it was there. I was just like, I'm gonna focus on this. I mean, I find the writing process so creatively satisfying and
Mm.
rewarding. Up to a certain point.
Yeah.
Uh,
It can be a trial sometimes.
yeah, exactly. Actually, the more you get, it becomes a job. It gets a lot less of that. But still, it's the best job that I've ever had, and I've had some terrible ones. So yeah, in film school, I really just focused on writing, and then after graduating, I moved to Los Angeles and pretty immediately started working as an assistant at a very small production company called Sobini Films that was started by Mark Amin, who created Trimark in the 80s, the house that Leprechaun built, and among many others. And there as I said, I was doing coverage. I was just reading so many scripts, and I think there I was very lucky that I could, you're there when you work in Hollywood, especially on the lower rung, you're putting in like at least 10-hour days at an office.
Mm.
And we weren't the busiest company in the world. So fortunately, I did have a lot of spare time where I could be writing up my own scripts. Think perhaps I've lost track of the question at this point,
No, that's great. That's fine.
but yeah. So it was there. I really just started cultivating a voice. I hope and I think, and um, yeah. Then
Yeah.
It was there that I wrote The Wretched Emily Derringer, which is the script that got me on the blacklist for the first time and got me my agent, my manager. And in a lot of ways, that was the beginning of my career.
Fantastic. And what was your sort of first experiences with horror more generally? Were there any sort of horror films or media that inspired you when you were younger?
Yeah, all the same ones. I'm a millennial. Hocus Pocus was a movie, the first movie to ever traumatize me, and that I made my mom turn off after they had been burned in the kiln, but then are like subsequently resurrected when they like opened the book. I don't know how well you guys know the movie. I was like, I am out. They can come back. I thought we were safe, and so I was terrified of witches and Are You Afraid of the Dark? And there was just a lot of like horror media aimed at children back
Mm.
then. I
Yeah, a lot of
think
gateway horror.
significantly less so. Yes, exactly. But I think the trick was for me, um, I these things really did scare me, and it was just always when I was going to bed. I mean, that's it was partly where Cobweb came from. And I would just be lying in bed in the dark and just hearing noises and my imagination going crazy.
Mm.
And I think the tool that I developed for psychological survival then was thinking, well, someone's coming up with these stories that that are scaring me. So if I'm terrified of something, why don't I just write a story out of it? And then that sort of exercise, I don't know if I was like as I was intellectualizing it as much as I am now at the time, but I was just like that exercising the demon in a way, and it makes this fear productive of mine. And as soon as that like switch happened, I feel like I was no longer scared, but my imagination would still steer dark. But it was like, well, that's good fodder. I'm going to write
Yeah.
this down. And so I was really bad at sports as a kid, and so at a certain point, recess becomes like all the kids go and play like kickball or whatever, and I was the kid who would just have my notebook and just hidden away like under
Yeah.
some playground equipment, just writing my little stories. So yeah, I think that was that. I was a really scared kid, and I turned it into something
Channeled it.
productive, I hope. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
awesome. That's awesome. I mean, before we dive into the script specifically, I mean, and you've kind of touched on it already, but was there any point where was there a moment or image that first sort of sparked the idea for Cobweb, or was it a combination of things?
Yeah, I mean, it was, and this is maybe a little embarrassing to admit. Like, I've subsequently learned it's a little bit more cliche than I realized, but like, I really, when I was a kid, just the idea of someone living in my wall or like
Mm,
looking at me through the vent or like whatever, just those were the noises you would hear. You get like a
Yeah.
bang, the house resettling, and I would just imagine someone who shouldn't be there was just there. And so it was just a really primordial that we can talk about it more as the conversation progresses, but like the part of the impetus for Cobweb was just to write something as like primordial, simple, the most like basic day one fears that
Yeah.
people typically have. And so, yeah, it was the idea of it's in the script, it's not in the movie, but it was the cat getting pulled through the
yeah,
hole, and the
yeah.
that would like, and the initial village, I mean image was actually like kind of like a almost a Mickey Mouse hand, like a
Mm,
gloved hand like coming out and
yeah.
grabbing it, but for whatever reason that was just an interesting image to me, and then I uh expanded it a little bit more in my imagination. A child like talking. I think the very earliest version of the movie was, I just had in my notes app, like The Gentleman in the Walls, and it was about a boy
Mm.
who I think went to live with his grandmother, and there was a guy speaking to him like from in the walls and um commanding him to like do things, bring him meat and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the I'll just keep it simple. That was the answer to your question. Those two images.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
Awesome.
That's amazing. So when we read the Cobweb script, Lee and I both felt it has this really kind of fairy tale quality to it, and there are sort of elements of fairy tales in there. The sort of the pumpkin patch, and obviously the scary house on the hill, and child protagonist. Were you kind of intentionally drawing from sort of fairy tale or fable kind of tropes, and what were the most kind of strongest influences upon the work?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't know how, if I can point to one specifically so much as the general milieu of just like a Grimm's fairy tale, dangerous parents, some unexplained supernatural force or whatever. And again, just going back to the simplicity, like I definitely wanted to make a rated R movie or write a hard, hard edge script, but still through a very childlike perspective.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, just stripping it down to its bare elements. There's a lot of references. JD Lifshitz at Boulder Light, I think, is the only person who ever got the references in the script to all the um, oh my god, I'm just blanking on the on one of my favorite filmmakers' names right
I
now.
do this all the
Um,
time.
yeah, wait. Val Lewton, sorry, and he's a producer, but like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Val Lewton movies, yeah. So like Cat People and Leopard Man and I
yeah, of
Walked with a
course.
Zombie. Just those like 65-minute like black
Mm.
and white like you never see. Well, I guess specifically with Cat People, like it's all about what you don't see.
Yeah,
Um,
in the shadows.
yes, exactly. Um, those were it was all that was the soup of what I was trying to touch upon when I started this thing. And the writing of it, like I can't tell you how I decided upon like the specific style of the script, the no punctuation or whatever. I think it was partly kind of a challenge for myself to I wanted to write very I want to be as concise with the language as I possibly could, and I figured a way to challenge myself to do that is if every line has to be its own thought, and I can't have a period and then start another sentence. Well, that's one way to like get me to think very specifically about the language. Whenever I start a new script, the tone is, I think, the thing that I have to figure out
Mm.
from the outset, and that takes like a couple tries. Like I'll rewrite the first few pages over and over until I
Yeah.
find the style because that's how I see everything um, going
Yeah.
forward.
That's really interesting because obviously when we were reading the script, immediately after the title page, you've got this kind of short piece of prose, and that really kind of sets the scene for the story and obviously the tone for the script. What was your thinking, starting the script out like that? Was there any sort of thinking behind that particularly, or?
Um, no, I mean, other than just it's all the same thing. It's just I really wanted to create a vibe, a tone. I wanted to, you know, I'm the audience that I'm writing to. At least at this part of my career, when I wrote this, was the army of unpaid interns or underpaid assistants who are the ones who are actually going to be filtering through this. And how do you get their attention? Well, set a little a spooky mood and
Yeah, it's
I
great. It's a
it
great tip.
I mean it started like in media res with just the tap 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 on the walls, and
Yeah.
I think I probably was just like, well, I'll give them a little place setting
Mhm.
Yeah.
before I get there. So I don't think it started that way. I think I probably went back and added that later.
Right.
Awesome. Awesome. I mean, we commented during our episode that we felt the style of writing may not have worked if the protagonist, if Peter had been like older, if he'd been like in his like mid-teens or early teens. And was that something you considered? Like, did the age of the protagonist kind of influence how you chose to write the script in that kind of storybook fairy tale style?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, beyond just I will admit, I after I wrote Cobweb, I tried the same style again with with another script,
Yeah.
and then like recently I went back. It was one that I just put in the shelf, and I went back and like it's like, okay, well, this does not work at all. Let me like go back and add all the punctuation. It doesn't need to be this long. Like this is
Yeah.
it's completely inappropriate for this screenplay. But yeah, again, very much it was like I wanted to again, tone is very important to me, and I really wanted this movie to feel like it was from the perspective of a 8-year-old boy, and the language was very much part of that. Like I think maybe subconsciously, I'm not even like I just came from my parents' house, which is what a lot of the script is
Mm.
that was in my mind's eye what was happening,
Yeah.
and I a lot of just those like scary stories to tell in the dark kind of books.
Yeah.
Uh all those had a very simple language in them as well, so I think it was like really trying to go for that Scholastic book club kind of a scary story you'd pick up. But again, I wanted it to, go hard, but I
Yeah.
wanted to lull you into a feeling of like reading like just some like 40-page little paperback that you got from the library.
Yeah, that's amazing. I
Yeah.
mean, you kind of touched on this already, but visually the script for Cobweb is so appealing, and there's some, you've used a lot of really clever kind of devices, the formatting and changes in font, and you mentioned the lack of full stops and sort of fairly clipped kind of descriptive passages. We were wondering whether this is kind of a conscious decision just for this project, but you said maybe, you tried it on a different project. So it's not possibly your sort of natural writing voice, or?
Yeah, yeah, I have a different. I feel like every script. I mean, I like to think that I have a, consistent voice throughout, but this is definitely the most formally experimental. And it was
Yeah.
before I tried it with this other script before Kappa had even got out into the world. Like, I really thought this was a writing sample for a long time. I had very almost no expectations of anyone buying it or really anything happening. Uh, So, but I do try to mess with, or play with format as much as I can, just in terms of like I don't want it to be gimmicky, um, but I do think that surgically playing with the format can be very effective in just painting the picture for the reader. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I have, I've read. I hope this doesn't come off bad, but like I've read scripts that people I know who have specifically told me that they were like very inspired by Cobweb
Mm.
have like sent me afterwards, and it was a lot of just playing with the format in ways to like,
Yeah.
but in ways that I did not think were necessary.
Yeah.
And so, which is just a good lesson for me as well. Like okay, you can go too far with it. Don't try to be too clever. Just keep in mind that you are trying to tell a story as clearly as possible, and you can kind of disappear up your own ass if you're also trying to impress people with how
Yeah.
cool you can be with
I
formatting.
think
But
we definitely mentioned during the episode that we've just done is that, all of this is everything that you've done is kind of in service of that kind of fairy tale kind of tone. None of it feels like a gimmick. It all sort of feels really correct for the
Mm.
script and for the film.
thank you.
And one thing we did notice, I mean, the climax of the script differs very much from what we're presented with in the film. And can you kind
Yes,
of talk us through that divergence, how it came about, and like, what your thoughts are and which ending you prefer?
I can say confidently I prefer my original ending.
I
And
do
it
too.
is it is I still to this day get a lot of like messages from people who tell me like, they're very nice about the script, and I loved the ending.
Mm.
Mm,
And it was belt. I mean, I like I like some symmetry in my structure. It opens
Yeah.
with Peter on one side of the wall, and then it ends with him on the other.
On the
And
other side, yeah.
um, I am also, frankly, a lot more sympathetic to Sarah than the film I think ultimately is. And I like her getting her little happy ending as well. Um,
Mm.
but the thing is, film is a collaborative medium, and
mm,
I love the movie as well. And there's so many great things in the movie that aren't in the
Mm.
script. But that was the case. It's a dark ending,
Yeah.
and it was my first studio sale, and I loved everyone I worked with on it. Some of whom I'm still like extremely close with and working with again. Um, but studio people and like production people, when they get a dark ending, especially one featuring children, they'll
Yeah.
typically are like, well, we can't really do this. And
Mm.
I was just so happy to be involved and just like
yeah.
have a movie seemingly getting made. I was very naive at the time. I was like, well, this is getting made, and little did I know how close it was to complete disaster so many times. But still, I just was there said we need to change the ending, and I was like, fine. And the ending changed quite a lot throughout the development process and through the production process, because of course, when you're actually like making the movie, things happen. But ultimately, yes, I love the film, but I wish it had my ending.
Yeah,
um, but
I
what are you
think we're
gonna
in the
do?
same boat on that one. Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I definitely do.
yeah. Oh well,
But I'm
these
curious,
things happen.
at what kind of point in the process, like, did your kind of involvement with the script end? I mean, was it a case of like you sold the script and then the studio just kind of went with it, or did they kind of involve you all the way through?
I was involved. I was on set. Like I was
Oh,
pretty
brilliant!
thoroughly
Right,
involved throughout. I'm
yeah,
very happy for the most part with how things went. I think whatever post production I think is the where I was least involved, and
yeah,
that's I had some frustrations then, but ultimately like we parted ways for a little bit during that whole, but then like at the end came back, and then I had notes on what I had been seeing from
mhm,
the final cut, that some of which they accepted and some of which they didn't. But no, ultimately, I everyone was really cool to keep me as involved as I was, and I do. I have. I like to think it's just because I'm a good person to work with, but I also think I wrote it in a very distinct style, and that was
yeah,
definitely a selling point for a lot of people like along the way. And I think it
No,
was
yeah,
just so
definitely.
much easier to be like, well, this is the guy who did it.
Stick it.
Um, but also, I do think that because I came from the development world,
mhm,
uh, I think I just understood how that process worked, maybe more so than a lot of like writers who didn't come
yeah,
from that. And so I think I knew how to play the game. Is the also just um, probably the more correct answer. And so I didn't put up too much of a fuss about anything that I
yeah,
necessarily disagreed with. And I think I like to think that and they obviously had great ideas too. So
mm.
I hope that I implemented them well. But I think also, uh, yeah, I don't know. I also came cheap. So it probably would have been more expensive to fire me and hire
yeah.
someone else.
Well, it's such a collaborative medium, isn't it? And it's everyone sort of pitches in and makes the thing that you end up with. So I think
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Hmm.
Yeah, me and Lee both were really sort of fascinated as well by kind of process and how writers kind of go about writing screenplays. Um, could you tell us a bit about your process when you're kind of planning and writing an original script? Do you have a set process, or is it more kind of bespoke for each project? Or
It's definitely bespoke. I mean, I think I would like to, as I go forward, start implementing a little bit more structure to it,
Mhm.
because I'm writing an assignment right now, and that was one where I had to have a very thorough outline, and frankly, I'm just following it completely, and I'm like, well,
Mm.
this is going a lot faster than it normally goes for me.
So much
Um,
more efficient.
yes, exactly. I'm very intuitive, I think, but like most of my projects, I'll just speak to obviously the original ones. I have a lot of different ideas that I have a lot of files in my notes app that I'm constantly adding, more to. And eventually one starts, through gravitational pull, collecting more and more ideas. And that becomes the more exciting one. And as soon as kind of feel like I have a tone, I have a good opening scene, um, I feel like I have enough that I could get like 15 pages out if I just like sat down and devoted like a couple days to this. Those are the ones that I start. And if those first 15 pages go well, then that's the one that I'm off to the races on. I'm writing a horror spec right now. That was exactly that process. It was like a germ of an idea that I had a few years ago, and then over the years, I just kept like, oh, that would work really well for this thing over here. This is a theme or an image that would go really well in this file over here, and then I was like, I think I basically have a movie here.
Mhm.
Um, and then I have, and then it goes from notes to docs. And that's when I start doing a little bit more of a formalized outline, and I have like a style that I write it in that's very specific, just to alleviate, make it as, hit the ground running as much as easy as. I'm mixing metaphors here. Anyway, um, just to get started, and that's more formalized, and it'll basically resemble like a beat sheet or an
Mhm.
outline. Some parts will be more specific than others, but I will refer to that. Um, And then yeah, I try to write in order. I know a lot of people will like write different scenes just that and then put them all together, but I very much have to do the ironing process. Paul Thomas Anderson described writing as ironing, and that really stuck with me, which is just like
Yeah.
I'm constantly, I start the day reading what I already had, and then I'm fixing things along the way, and then I get to the new scene, and I try to write as much as that is possible. But yeah, I need to start from the beginning
Mm.
and go from there. I could keep rambling, but have I
That's
answered
great.
the? All right. Um, but yeah, there's not really a set process. It's everyone's a little bit different.
Yeah.
We always like to ask writers about like structure, like how screenplays are structured and how narrative structure kind of plays a part in the writing process. I mean, is it something you kind of pay particular attention to? Is it like second nature, or do you just kind of, as you said, just start at the beginning and just go?
I think it's somewhat second nature. I've never really read a screenwriting book, um, telling myself like, oh, I don't want to, you know, ingest all the wrong ideas, which is dumb because I don't think that really happens. But no, it's too late now. But I, as a viewer, I've already mentioned Paul Thomas Anderson. I love mess. I love impressionism. As a
Mm.
writer, I think I'm very formalist. I There was an essay by Edgar Allan Poe I read in high school about him talking about the Raven and his philosophies for writing like short stories and poems, where just absolutely everything has to be in service of like the idea.
Hmm.
And so for me, when I'm writing, I think back to that. So I want my I like, as I mentioned with Cobweb, I like the symmetry of, you know, opening one way and ending another way. I'm very cognizant of um my opening images, and will hopefully reflect in some way my final images.
Yeah.
I really need an ending. At
Mm.
least something, it doesn't need to be exactly worked out, but I just need, you know, that helps crystallize what your movie's actually about. And if
Mhm.
I'm writing dialogue, and I don't really know what they're saying, I can return to what's the central idea of this movie.
Yeah.
And that will always help me as like a guiding light. So it's, yeah, so it's somewhat intuitive in that I think I basically know what a first act, second act, you
Yeah.
know, 2A, 2B, final act is. Um, but I do have a lot of like tricks of the trade that I've picked up over the years that I definitely return to.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, great.
Yeah,
We
I
spoke
love a good
to
setup and payoff.
Love and
yeah,
payoff.
yeah, yeah. We spoke to Brett Pierce recently about the writing of The Wretched,
Mhm.
and had a good conversation with him about his kind of process when it comes to theme. We were wondering when you kind of start to sort of, well, tell us how you work with theme, and is it something that you kind of start out with and use as a guiding principle when you're writing, or is it something that you find more organically as you go through the process?
It's something that I think, no, that's a good question.
Thank you.
I think as of late, I've been more aware of trying to have a central theme
Mm,
as I'm starting. Cobweb, I didn't. Cobweb is one that like talking to people about it like through the development process and like subsequently I've been like, oh wow, that's one of the most personal movies I've ever written. And I was really kind of unaware of it at the time.
Yeah.
Um, I come from a home, an Irish family where not a lot was being spoken about in terms of like our issues, and everything was kind of like kept under the surface, and we didn't really discuss a lot of things.
mm,
And I think that's what that movie is largely about,
Mm.
and the ways that these kind of buried secrets can come out. And I wonder if I had known going in, how that would have changed the writing of that. But nowadays, I do, like I said, I return to themes so much in my writing that I really do feel like I need to have. Doesn't have to be the most concrete. Like I don't need a thesis statement, and they don't have to be a didactic exercise. But just having something that's personal to me that I feel like I would love to work through in the writing process. Yeah, so right now I am very much aware, cognizant of the thematic idea before I begin, but I definitely wasn't when I started.
Interesting.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, one thing, the generic question that I'm sure you get asked all the time. Do you have any sort of advice you could offer our screenwriting audience when it comes to breaking into the industry? And if you have any advice for writing horror more specifically, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, my general advice is, I mean, the industry is, who knows what's going on now. So like, all right,
Yeah.
is anyone even going to have it? I guess my first bit of advice is don't focus on, never use AI. Um,
Yeah.
Second would be breaking in is so intimidating and is such a impossible, like Herculean task that somehow people manage to do all the time. And I guess it's all just luck. And you obviously you can't control luck, but you can control how many opportunities for luck to happen.
Mm.
Is can I should have known where I was going with that sentence before I started speaking it. This is the lesson right here. Um, for me, I went to film school at Temple University in Philadelphia. Not really connected to the industry at all. I didn't know anybody. My roommate, who I moved out there with, she was the one who got me the job, the interview to work at her company. So in that case, it was like a who you know
Hmm.
situation. But yeah, so I guess who you know is hugely important. Not everyone is gonna, my uncle isn't a Warner brother, but you can uh, meet people who are all kind of starting out in the same level that you are at currently,
Yeah.
and be very invested in your friend's success, and they
Mm.
will hopefully be invested in yours.
Yeah.
And you start creating opportunities for luck to happen. Um, you can enter the contests. I think a lot
Mm.
of them are parasitic, but I do also think a lot of them still do carry some weight. But for me, it's not even necessarily about winning or the recognition you get from these. It's all about, again, more opportunities.
Hmm.
I met my managers, John Zozerny and Jeff Portnoy at Bellevue, not because I was a finalist in the Austin screenwriting competition with Wretched Emily Derringer, but because they, as a young upstart management company, were looking for material. They were judges.
Mm.
They signed up to be judges and to
Mhm.
just get all this like fresh material. So
Yeah.
they emailed me separately from Austin asking to have a meeting with them, and that's how I got my start. But I was also, I entered the nickel competition, and I got okay, but didn't succeed in there, and that was a huge bummer. I was taking I applied to be a manager's assistant because I heard at Brillstein, because I heard that like another like manager's assistant at Brillstein got her script repped by her boss,
Yeah.
and so I was like, all right, well, I'll get it out there. And she didn't hire me, but she did offer to read my script. And it was just like so
Okay.
many of these things where I was just like, yeah, I'm all over the place. Uh, Another thing is to make people aware that you are a writer.
Yeah.
Embrace it. Don't be embarrassed. Don't hoard your material. I mean, if it's terrible, wait a little bit, but it's probably not. But also, like, no one is going to remember it if it's bad. That's maybe controversial advice, but it's one that I believe to be true. Like, I don't think you really burn bridges
Yeah.
with bad scripts. Because people are only going to read like 5 pages anyway and just tell you they read it if it's bad.
Yeah.
But so you can send them a new script in the future. But the point is, like, your friends and other people in your network should think of you as a writer. So if they are having drinks with some agent or whatever, or some agent's assistant, um, and they're saying, we're looking for race car movies. They'd be
Mhm.
like, well, I know my friend has been working on like a race car
Yeah.
script. Like,
Yeah.
let me send it to you. None of these are at all guaranteed ways into the industry, but one of them might be at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just about doing every little thing you can,
Mm.
planting seeds everywhere, posting, doing podcasts. Like, just the
Yeah.
Yeah.
internet is like, it is great. Um, Again, I know there's maybe some controversy around the Blacklist website, but I know people who have gotten success from hosting their scripts there. So it's just like,
Mm.
there's all these little things that on their own are absolutely no guarantee of any success. But it only takes one opportunity. That
That's
was a really
brilliant.
long,
Yeah.
unwieldy answer to your
No,
question. But
that was a fantastic answer. That was really good. Thank you.
okay.
Well, Chris,
Thanks.
yeah, I mean, we're running out of time on the meet here, so I just want to say it's been an absolute joy. Again, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show and chatting to us. The Cobweb script
Thank you for having me.
genuinely was one of the most inspirational scripts we've read so far on Script to Scream, and I know, you know, our listeners will get so much out of kind of hearing you talk about the script, talking about your process. So both me and Lee, we can't thank you so much for coming on and taking
Yeah.
the time.
Of
Yeah.
course. Well, thank you for
It's
having me. Thank you for
fantastic.
having this podcast. As a writer, I really love when people can devote the time to the script itself, and talking about the process and the writing. So this is great. I've subsequently become a listener. I just listened to your Brian Duffield episode on
Oh,
my way
amazing.
back from
Oh, thank you.
Pennsylvania. The babysitter was a huge inspiration to me.
Yeah.
I should have just said that from the outset. I just rip off Brian Duffield. I read a Brian Duffield script as an assistant. And I was like, this guy's got to
Why the
figure
hell
it
not?
out. I'm gonna read everything that he's written and do what he does. So
Excited for Whale Fall.
yes,
Yeah, me
I
too.
am very psyched for that one.
I love the
Great
book,
book
so I
too.
can't wait to
Yeah,
see
yeah,
what he
yeah.
does to it. Yeah, it's going to be brilliant.
Uh,
Amazing.
Really good.
Okay,
Thanks, guys.
thank you
Well,
so much.
thank you
Thank you
so
so much.
much.
Really
It's been a
appreciate it,
pleasure. And
Chris.
again, thank you for writing such an awesome script because, you know, it really did blow my mind when I read it. It's fantastic.
You're too
Okay.
much.
Thanks so much. Okay, Lee. So there we are. That was Chris Devlin. Fantastic chat, I thought. I mean, really, really lovely guy.
Yeah, he was awesome, wasn't he? Really, really cool guy, and really cool of him to stop in and have a chat with us. But yeah, I thought some of his responses to the questions are really kind of eye-opening and very interesting. You
Yeah,
know,
me too. I mean, it was really fascinating to hear him talk about, you know, a lot of the stuff that we sort of covered. I mean, I
Mm,
thought what we could do again. I mean, we did this with when we sort of interviewed Brett Pierce, but I thought we could sort of have a quick chat about some of the things that came up, and
yeah,
maybe some of the things that would be sort of interesting to our listeners and to sort of screenwriters out there generally. And yes, just sort of cover some of the things that sort of Chris said and some of the tips maybe and sort of highlight some of that for our listeners. So I think one of the things that Chris mentioned was that he spent, you know, initially when he was sort of breaking into the industry, spent a lot of time doing coverage on scripts when he started out. And, you know,
mm,
obviously reading scripts is something that we've done a lot for on the course and
yeah,
feeding back on each other's work and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to highlight, you know, how important I think it is to sort of go about reading scripts and actually trying to sort of break them down. We've been
yes.
doing a lot of that. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of get your thoughts on that, Lee, initially about actually reading scripts and how important that
Yeah,
is.
absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that screenwriting is an art form. It's an art form, and a lot of people think, you know, it's easier than writing books or it's easier than writing short stories and that, but it really isn't. You know, like the format may seem fairly simple, but there's so much nuance and there are so many layers and so much depth to what we do. You know, I mean, it's very easy to write a script, don't get me wrong, you know, but to write a good script is
It's a different
extremely
story.
difficult.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's very hard. And obviously feedback is one of the key sort of things that you need to improve your script. You know, I mean, if no one else reads it but you, and then you send it off somewhere, the odds are it's going to suck ass. You know,
mm. Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
to just to not put too fine of a point on it, but you need that
Don't mince your
feedback
words.
because yeah, no. But I mean, I've been guilty of that. You know, when I first wrote scripts, I thought they were amazing when I first started, and you know, and when people kind of gave me sort of like criticizing feedback, I was like, well, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. And you have to kind of humble yourself in a way because obviously you're very protective of your work, but you know, there's an art to giving feedback and there's also an art to receiving feedback, I
Yeah,
think. You know, there's no such thing as invaluable feedback. It's all useful. You know,
yeah,
even if it's just how one person sees your work, that's still an eye opener. Because if one person sees your work like that, the odds are that a significant number of people will see your work like that. So, You just have to think about what you've done, think about how it can be changed, think about how you can make things clearer. But yeah, feedback is so important, so important.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's difficult to know what's landing and what's not, and what's
Mm,
clear and what's not in your story, and whether if you're sort of foreshadowing things or setting things up, whether that lands or whether it doesn't. So I think sort of feedback is really important for that sort of thing, but also just more generally, I think reading scripts is really important. If you want to be kind of writing scripts.
yeah.
And familiarizing yourself with the sort of ebb and flow of a narrative over something
Hmm.
like a screenplay format, I think
Yeah.
is really, really important. So I guess
Yeah.
my
I
my sort of thing is
100%
is
agree. Yeah.
trying to read as many scripts as you can, basically,
Yeah.
is sort of
Yeah.
my
And
takeaway.
read them with a critical eye. Don't
Yeah.
just sit and I mean, just sitting and reading a script is great and it will help you. But if you've got the time to just kind of sit and really kind of look and take it apart and analyze different things, and the more you do it, the more adept you'll become at it. I know since I've started the podcast, for example, I've become a lot more critical of screenplays
Mm,
because I've had to when I'm literally like taking these things apart scene by scene, and I've kind of developed a bit of an eye for it now, and it's so eye-opening. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, read scripts to write scripts. But
yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
absolutely. Chris also spoke about channeling some of his own sort of formative experiences and fears,
Mm,
and how that sort of helped him generate ideas for horror specifically.
yeah.
And I think this is something that you've probably done a little bit as a writer as well of
Oh yeah.
horror. So I just wondered if
Yeah.
you could,
Absolutely.
as a sort of writer of horror, mostly, I'd be interested to get your sort of take on that.
Yeah, I mean, my most successful scripts have all been ones that have a very large, for lack of a better way, a large part of me in them. A lot of either a character is, kind of loosely based on me or based on experiences or based on fears that I've had. I mean, they say write what you know.
Mm,
And that's very true because no one can write what you know better than you. And the odds are that if something scares you, it's going to scare somebody else,
yeah.
unless you're like terrified of blue tack or something like that. The odds are, if there's something that genuinely terrifies you, it will genuinely terrify a large percentage of people. And even if it doesn't terrify them, they'll still understand that fear, and the fear will still kind of seep in, and they'll still get scared, if you do it well enough. But yeah, write what you know, and yeah, put yourself in there. The only downside to doing that is, again, going back to the previous point, it kind of makes it a bit harder receiving feedback if
Yeah.
if you've put a lot of yourself into a script and then someone tears it apart, it can be a bit soul destroying. But it's all part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I know, the idea of using kind of almost kind of intrinsic primal fears is something that,
Mm,
I know you've definitely thought about and done,
yeah,
in some of the scripts that I've read of yours. So I thought that was really sort of interesting, of
yeah,
Chris to talk about that, and specifically in relation to horror.
yeah.
Yeah.
Horror done well is horror that's personal.
Yeah. Yeah. But personal to us all. There's sort of
Yeah,
universal kind of fears, I think, that you can, as well as your own sort of personal fears, but there's this universality to the human experience, I guess. And,
yeah,
horror sort of tapping into that can be very popular and very powerful.
mm,
It's
yeah,
cool. It was interesting to hear Chris speak about being influenced by Val Luton as well, and some of the older kind of film. You know me, Lee.
yeah,
I love,
yeah. Oh
talking
yes,
about
yeah.
old movies and how they influence newer films and seeing those
Yeah.
links. But did you have any thoughts, off the back of that about sort of visiting or at least being aware of some of the sort of classic horror movies and
Oh yeah, I mean they're
that?
classic for a reason, aren't they? The classics because they're iconic and because they kind of established a lot of the tropes and things that we are so used to now. But I mean, there's there's an old saying, isn't there? Like he who forgets history is doomed to repeat it.
Mm,
So, learn from what has gone before. I think every script and every film is a teachable or a learnable experience.
yeah.
You could just sit and watch like the worst movie ever made, and you'll still learn something from it. Most likely, like how not to do something, but
Yeah.
you're still you're still learning. And the classics, as I said, are classics for a reason. And
Mm.
yeah, draw inspiration from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're covering some of them on Script to Scream. So have a listen to the
Yep.
podcast because we're covering some of these classics right here.
Yep. Absolutely. Classics, moderns,
Yeah.
we dip our toes in everything.
So Chris spoke about how finding tone is really important to him when he is sort of writing a project, and his inclusion, I think, of that first page on the Cobweb script. He spoke about this
Mm.
was really sort of an effort to do this, and wanting to kind of set a tone. But he also sort of spoke about how, this was an effort to sort of try and help set a mood and a tone for some of the interns that he thought would probably be likely doing coverage on the script initially,
Yes.
which I thought was a great tip when you're writing spec scripts, is just be
Mm.
aware of your audience and who's kind of going to be reading this.
Yeah. I mean, one of the best pieces of screenwriting advice I ever got was from one of my mentors, Dr. Michaela Cortez. And she said to me, she said, write the best script for the person that's going to be reading it,
Mm,
and write the best script to be read rather than the best script to be filmed.
yeah.
Because the first thing you need to do is get a reader's attention, and you need to make whoever reads your script love it enough to show it to the next person, and then they've got to love it enough to show it to the next person. And in order to do that, you've got to kind of go arguably down like the Shane Black, Brian Duffield
Mm,
kind of route, or like Chris did with Cobweb, and just
yeah.
make it an incredibly smooth and enjoyable read. Something that stands out. And as Chris said, he kind of almost sort of programmed that script to catch the attention of the sort of like low ranking script readers who are like the gatekeepers in a way, like the first line of defense that you've got to kind of break through to get your script up to the upper echelons of management. And obviously he did a fantastic job of that, and it paid dividends, and it worked really well.
Yeah, and to that, I mean, I thought it was fascinating that Chris spoke about how the style of the Cobweb script was influenced by the perspective of the protagonist.
Mm,
And I really thought that that was another great tip for people to sort of take on board and absorb, and sort of be cognizant of how the style of your script should be sort of, in a way, I think, influenced by the perspective of the protagonist, the main character in your film.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really solid point. I mean, I think even Chris sort of said that he's tried that similar technique on different scripts and it just didn't work. I think it was
Yeah.
a case of the perfect writing style with the perfect protagonist, and it kind of gelled together just to make a absolutely pretty much damn perfect script. But yeah, there's absolutely no reason why you can't tailor your writing style to your main protagonist. It's something I've never really thought of before,
Mm.
but it's definitely something that's kind of stayed with me after our chat, and it's something I will definitely try and implement in some form in the future.
Yeah, well, certainly something just to be aware of, isn't it? I mean, it's
Mm,
probably more sort of relevant, I guess, when there's a child protagonist, but and sort of Chris talks about how the script was molded to kind of suit that sort of protagonist being younger.
yeah,
And you mentioned that when we did our sort of
mm,
roundup as
yeah,
well. But yeah, I just thought it was a sort of interesting point and something that sort of writers can be aware of in terms of keeping their sort of protagonist perspective in mind when writing the script, and sort of maybe even sort of consciously molding the style of the script around the sort of protagonist of the
yeah.
piece is something that you can experiment with and play with and see how
Absolutely,
it works.
absolutely.
And we talked about obviously playing with the format of scripts, and how this can be really engaging for readers, and sort of mentioned that already. But as you sort of pointed out, Chris said that this can go too far sometimes, and
Yeah,
it really does need to be subservient to the story. And I think that that
yeah,
is a really important sort of point, is when you're reading something like a Shane Black or like a Brian Duffield script, or like this Cobweb script, is that
mhm,
none of the sort of tinkering with formats feels out of place, and they are
yeah,
sort of subservient to the actual story that's being told, and the tonality of the piece. And I
yeah.
think that that's it's a kind of style over substance sort of debate, isn't it? And these scripts definitely have sort of substance, and the style works towards that.
Mm.
So I didn't know if you had any sort of general thoughts on that.
I'm a big fan. I'm a bit, as you know, I love like Brian Duffield, but yeah, any kind of like playful kind of creative formatting in a script, I usually am very much behind, but it does kind of have to feel organic. If you
Yeah.
just kind of just throw something in there one time in the middle of the script, it's going to feel really jarring and out of place. But Devlin was very clever the way he did it. I mean, from the literally the very first page after the title page, he starts to play with the formatting of the script, and
Mm.
he just keeps it going. Let's say not on every page. You'd often go quite a few pages without anything kind of happening, but then you'll just get like a little kind of just bit of tinkering with the formatting, the font size, the alignment. Nothing crazy. Nothing. No, there's no kind of Duffield style splash pages in there.
Mm.
But and there's nothing on the scale of, for example, the original Quiet Place script, which is the script that has the most creative uses of formatting by
Mm.
far. And that was enough to get that script noticed. But to get it made, it was quite heavily rewritten, and most of that stuff was taken out.
Yeah.
But it just goes back to writing the right script for the right reader. It was brazen enough to get the attention of the studios, who decided they wanted to make the film, and then John Krasinski come along and heavily rewrote the script, took most of that flashy formatting out, but if they hadn't had that in there, the script probably wouldn't have been noticed. So there
Yeah.
is definitely a time and a place to play with your formatting, but if you're going to do it, it's got to be consistent. You can't just throw one random page in there
Mm.
because it's going to feel really out of place. It's going to feel really jarring, and it needs to feel organic. It needs to feel, like it belongs there and not like it's just a gimmick you've thrown in just to kind of look cool.
Yeah, I think the my sort of general thinking was that it has to be in service of something.
Yes,
And there
exactly. Yeah.
needs to be a reason for it, and it has to be in service of the story,
Hmm.
or the
Yeah.
tone of the piece. And I think that's the
Yeah.
important thing. Formatting with scripts is interesting, and playing with it is eye-catching. But if it's not actually in service of something, then it can feel just like a bit of a gimmick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chris talked about the ending of the film, which is really different, obviously, from the ending of the script. And he mentioned how happy he was to sort of be involved in the production, and how much he was sort of happy to work with his collaborators.
Mm.
And I thought this was another really great tip, just about sort of putting your ego aside a little bit and just being
Yeah.
a really good collaborator, and
Hmm.
being willing to sort of work with people. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that, specifically about our own sort of experiences on the course, but just more generally about sort of being a sort of a willing collaborator and a good sort of worker, good person
Yeah.
to work with.
Yeah. I think if you want to get anywhere in this industry, you've got to think of your script almost as an asset that you're making, you're creating it, and then you're going to sell it to someone who's going to then put their twist on it, and then someone else is going to put their twist on it. And if you're lucky, like in Chris's case, you kind of get to stay on board and you
Mm.
get to kind of help shape that. But at the same time, I've heard so many stories from so many people about, screenwriters who have, they've got a good script, and someone's interested in it, and as soon as they mention like rewrites or changing things, the screenwriter literally just shuts down. It's like, no, you can't
Yeah,
change it. This is my script. This is how it is. And the second that happens, they're just written off,
yeah,
done. You've got to be willing to work. You've got to be willing to play the game. You've got to be willing to work with the studios, the executives. If they want to make big changes to your script, you can either choose to get your film made in some form or don't.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it,
yeah.
it is it is that simple. I mean, we've also heard lots of really positive stories about writers who have been involved all the way through, who have been on set, who have like done on set rewrites, who have been thoroughly involved, and they're always the ones that are willing to work with the studios. They're always the ones willing to work with other people to kind of collectively shape that vision. It's like you always say, screenwriting, it's a collaborative medium. Filmmaking is a
Mm.
collaborative medium. The screenplay is kind of the blueprint, but as that blueprint starts to be made, a lot of the times there's going to be changes. There's going to be things that don't work for whatever reason, and you got to be able to think on your feet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you just got to be open, right? And just be a
Yeah,
good sort of generous collaborator who's willing to sort of, put ego aside and not be too
you go at the
precious,
door. Yeah,
and just work with people and sort of get things made. Sometimes it's budgetary, sometimes it's just something, doesn't work for a particular actor or,
mm.
director or whoever wants to take it a certain way. But I
Yeah,
just think it's really important. I just think it's so important to be a willing kind of participant in the process and just be happy
yeah,
to work with people, and
yeah.
not be a thorn in the side and a sort of,
Mm.
bit of a diva about these things. I think that's a really
Yeah,
important tip.
yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's just it's a massive part of the game, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's interesting. Again, sort of Chris chatted about his process and how, it's really quite bespoke to each project at the moment. He's working sort of quite intuitively, but he did mention that he is possibly looking at implementing a more sort of structured process
Mm.
to his work. I just thought that was interesting, that
Yeah,
not everyone has a sort of set process, or sometimes it's kind of quite intuitive and bespoke. Other people have a much more sort of structured process, and both of these methods can obviously can work, but I just wondered what your sort of thoughts on that were, and any sort of
I
nuggets of
think
wisdom.
it basically I think it just boils down to there's no one right, correct way to write a screenplay. What
Yeah,
works for me may not work for you. Everybody is different. Everyone will give you advice. They will, try to teach you best practices, which you should always learn.
yeah,
But just because you learn something doesn't mean you have to use it. I think I
absolutely.
always a big fan of the old the Bruce Lee saying, is it be
I
like
was just
water?
thinking that. Yeah,
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 take what works and just discard what doesn't until you
and
find
then
your own path.
make
I
make
think
it your own.
yeah, make it your own. I think that is such a such a key thing, especially in screenwriting,
Mm,
that
yeah,
learn as much as you can and then decide what works for you and what doesn't.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the more you know, the more options you have, the more tools you have in your toolkit, and the more
yeah, absolutely.
versatile you are. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of round up, I mean, Chris, spoke about having sort of the germ of an idea to begin with, and then, over time, sometimes years, sometimes months, adding kind of little notes and then
mm,
ideas, and then sort of having, images, etc., coming up in his mind, and maybe even sort of
yeah,
putting some images aside, and then going on to write a sort of more formalized outline, or a beat sheet sort of thing, and then
mm,
he was talking about taking a pass at the first sort of 15 pages, and seeing how that works out, and
yeah.
getting to the end of that 15 and thinking, is this something that's going to work or not? I just thought that was interesting to
That was a
hear.
really interesting. Like I said, that was an approach I've never kind of attempted or even sort of thought about, but I
Yeah,
kind of like the idea of it because sometimes it feels like I spend forever planning stuff out and I just never get to bloody never get
yeah,
around to writing stuff anymore. I'm always
yeah,
planning. So I
yeah,
think it's getting to that point where you just take the plunge. Sometimes it's good just to sit down in front of your laptop or your typewriter or your notebook and just write,
yeah,
you know.
absolutely. Yeah, just splurge it out. I mean, he did speak about writing in order, which I thought was interesting, and then sort of
Yeah.
starting each day reading through what he's written before. And that's definitely something that I do. And
Hmm.
just sort of instinctively, I've fallen into that process of reading everything up to
Yeah.
the point that I'm starting again and then moving forward. What about you, Lee? What do you do at the start?
Usually that's my jam. I usually do try to write things in order, but there are some times when I've got a scene really clear in my mind and I've got one that isn't, and they don't correlate in that order. So sometimes
Mm,
I will jump ahead a scene or two. Sometimes I'll write the ending, but usually, as a rule, I tend to write in order. I
yeah.
just no, I just find it easier that way. But I know there are some people that always write the end first. Some people will
Hmm.
do that and work backwards. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
It's just whatever works for you. But yeah, I tend to write fairly chronologically, but I have been known to skip a scene or two if I just can't get my head around it. And then once I skip it, my subconscious is kind of slogging away at it while I'm doing other things, and then I can
Yeah.
usually just go back and get a handle on it.
Yeah. Good stuff. So Chris talks about trying to be a bit more conscious about having a central theme Although, you know, historically he's been a sort of a bit more about discovering the theme as the process went on, a little bit like
Yeah.
kind of Brett talked about previously. But
Mm.
I wondered if you had any thoughts on that and what your sort of process is on that.
I struggle with theme. It doesn't usually come until after the first draft, I think. I've usually
Yeah,
got like a rough idea, but sometimes it changes completely. Sometimes it's, it just needs a little bit of reinforcing, but I try not to dwell too much on it. I know it needs to be in there. I know it, but I find it tends to come organically
yeah,
after a while. There's no point trying to force a theme in there. Something will come. Every story has some kind of theme to it.
mm,
You know, you can always find a theme, but usually one will find you,
yeah.
and that's how I tend to work,
Yeah,
for
I'm
better
kind
or
of the
for
same. I
worse.
mean, I tend to have a sort of central idea, and it's usually about something
Mm,
in a sort of broader context, you know, in a theme sort of context. But quite often that has altered slightly or changed a little bit, and something else kind of comes out in the process. And I guess it's sort of, I think it's generally a good idea to have like a guiding theme that you're generally working towards,
yeah.
because it can help solve problems, you know, when the sort of
Hmm.
screenplay, you know, when things grind to a halt and you're thinking, oh my God, what, you know, where's this going to go? Sometimes you can reference back to your sort of your premise or your theme, and that can guide you in a way, be a guiding
Yeah.
light. But yeah, I think more often it does sort of organically change through a process, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
interesting how that works. A couple of sort of last things that Chris sort of mentioned about breaking in, and you know, obviously quite rightly, Lee, he said never use AI, which I'm you know, all for, a big fan of.
Yeah.
Don't you know, submit to our robotic AI overlords too easily. Pass off your creativity that simply. I think that's very very important. It's my hobby horse. Be invested in your friend's success, I think, was really a good tip.
Yes.
And I think that's really important, you know, to
Mm,
try and sort of celebrate your friends' successes, try and help them as much as you can,
yeah.
be there for them, and don't be, you know, sort of in any way kind of jealous about other
Yeah.
people's, you know, success. I think that's a really
Mm,
great tip. He also mentioned you can engineer your luck to a certain degree by creating opportunities and sort of
yeah.
putting yourself out there as much as possible.
Mm,
And I think those are really good sort of tips for people. You know.
absolutely. Yeah. I found that really fascinating. Like, just hearing about how he kind of got his break. And if you ask 100 screenwriters how they broke into the industry, you'll probably get 100 different answers.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it really is different for everyone. There's no kind of set way to do it, but the keys that I always hear are, network, network, network.
yeah,
Don't be a dick. That's pretty much
yeah, yeah, yeah,
the golden rule of life. Just don't be a dick and just network your ass off, but don't network just for the sake of trying to get in. Network for the sake of learning.
yeah,
Don't ask people to introduce you to managers or, give you breaks or anything like that. Just ask them for advice and ask them for help and kind of build up friendships,
mm,
because that's more important at the end of the day, because then if you don't break in, you've still got a load of really good friends.
yeah,
And that's arguably worth even more.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, definitely sort of networking so important. And I think, like you
Mm.
say, networking, you know, without necessarily having, not that you're not having a goal, but, you know, you just don't want to be going around asking people for things all the time. You know, you
Yeah.
just want to sort of
Yeah.
be a good kind of colleague again. I guess it goes back to, you know, and sort of,
Yeah.
you know, be someone who is fun to engage with and is pleasant to engage with, and
Yeah.
people know that you're not going to be sort of asking them to do things for you, you know, every step of the way. I think that's sort of really important. I think, you know, another thing he sort of mentioned, which I think was quite inspiring, really, was, you know, just to sort of embrace being a writer, you know,
Mm.
and not to sort of be afraid of telling people that, you know, that's what you are. You're a
Yeah.
writer. Don't be embarrassed about that, or sort of worry about people thinking it's slightly flaky. Like, just,
Yeah.
you know, I just think it's so important to be sort of proud of what you're
Yeah.
doing and be engaged in what you're doing, you know. The other thing he did mention about was looking for sort of newer companies or maybe sort of agents, assistants, etc.
Yeah.
Not necessarily going straight for the sort of the big, you know, the sort of the top brass, but, you know, really being conscious about being strategic about who you're sending things to and who you're approaching. So I thought that was another great.
That's not to say don't try the big guns, you know.
That's right.
It's,
Yeah.
you know, shoot for the stars, and you know you might always land on the moon.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's about it, Lee. I thought that was a really lovely chat with Chris. So sort of thankful that Chris came and spoke to us. He was so lovely and so sort of generous. We'll obviously be back with our next episode. Big one for the next episode, isn't it, Lee?
It is, yeah, it is. We are finally doing our most requested script or scripts, which is Alien,
Yeah.
and we'll be comparing the film to the Walter Hill draft and the Dan O'Bannon draft. So
Interesting.
we'll be comparing two different versions of the film, and there are some very eye-opening differences between the scripts, not just in the content, but in the way they're literally written, formatted, put down on paper. So hopefully it will be an interesting one. I'm sure most of you out there know a fair bit about Alien, but hopefully we'll find some little nugget of information that might tickle your fancy.
Good stuff. Well, I mean, you know me, I love Alien. It's a stone cold classic, absolute banger. So
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to that one. Yeah, so we'll be back soon. Obviously, we'll look forward to seeing you again. If you wanted to reach out to us, we are on most of or some of the social media platforms out there, not all by any means. But if you really want to reach out to us, it would be lovely to hear from you. You can go to our website as well, which is www.scripttoscreenpodcast.com. Obviously, it would be wonderful if you give us a lovely review or maybe a little sort of comment on some of these places. We'd love to hear from you. Helps grow the podcast, of course.
Yep.
But until next time, do take care.
Keep networking your ass off and keep writing those scares, folks.